Hi, I'm Eric. I'm back with another video. It is Sunday evening, um, December 21st. We're getting close to Christmas, and today was an interesting day. On Sundays, I usually have a meditation meeting, a Zen meditation meeting, and today we had several people show up, and I surprised them by invoking the holiday spirit by bringing some homemade brownies to them, which shocked and delighted them. I usually don't do that, of course, but I thought, why not, do something kind of fun and different. And I talked about a story about a university student in Japan who brought a Bible to a Zen master and asked the Zen master what he thought of what Jesus had to say, and not Jesus, but the Zen master said, "Yeah, that guy, he sounds like an enlightened person." So the point of this is that our minds are, well, all humanity has the same. We have the same brain, we have the same capabilities, and the problem is that we allow misconceptions and ideas to split us apart when in fact we have common interests, and it's really important to keep that in mind. So the reason why I bring it up is because after the meeting, several of us went to lunch, and one of them is a fellow. He's a little younger than me, but a very advanced meditator. He's a very smart, very intelligent, highly talented person, and he is. And he's a very kind-hearted, good person. So after the lunch, he said, "Oh, so by the way, what do you do besides do Zen?" And I told him that I have a Substack and a YouTube channel, and I talk about geopolitics. So eventually, it didn't take too long, but we got into the issue of what is going on in Ukraine. And I asked, where does he get his information from? And he said it's from a respectable YouTube channel called what is a Majority Report, I guess, by this guy named Sam Cedar. So I'd never watched that report because I find that many of these YouTube channels that are kind of associated with the Democratic Party are not necessarily reliable. So, and I rely on other sources, including what I do is I do deep research. So, for example, I go into the CIA reading room to see, well, what did the CIA actually say about their relationship with a certain historical personage named Stefan Bandera? And who is this guy, Stefan Bandera? And why was the main street in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, changed from Moscow Avenue to Bandera Avenue? Isn't that's kind of interesting? Who was this Bandera guy? But according to I guess you could say mainstream. What's the word in mainstream catechism? I think that's the best word to use. The mainstream catechism of the religion of American exceptionalism. Russia's bad. Putin is the richest man in the world, and he invaded Ukraine unprovoked, and that's all you really need to know. And if you present anything that goes counter to that, you'll get responses such as, well, it's really complicated, or, well, there's always two sides to every story. Everybody has their own opinion, or it's very difficult to know about these things, and who has the time to do this anyway? So that implies that we should just swallow what Sam Cedar and what the Democratic-based alt media says. You don't have to go to CNN. You can go to these other alt media spaces, and they'll tell you what they want you to know, and or you can go to Trump and MAGA and sources like that, and they'll tell you if you're oriented politically that way, what they want you to know, what they want you to think, what you think but that's not what I do. What I do is I actually go into the situation. I have visited Crimea in 2015. I have visited Russia several times and talked with Russian people. I've talked with Ukrainian people, including one person who's actually in Ukraine at the moment. And so I know what is going on there, and I don't need Sam Cedar or CNN or MSNBC or Rachel Maddow or any of these people to tell me what is going on, because I go direct to the source. Okay, so what I've done in this video segment and the information that follows is I have some video clips that go back to that period of time. One of them is a guy named Russell Bentley. Now, when the coup, when the crisis in Ukraine started in 2013, there were rumblings of what was going on in 2013, and I was following this because there was a Russian-oriented website. It was he's a I think he's a Swiss national. I think he's Swiss, but he's a Russian Orthodox. He's Russian extraction, and he used to be a very anti-Soviet person, but when after the Soviet Union fell, he suddenly realized that this was not a fight against the Soviet Union. It was a war of what he said, the empire against Russia. So he had a website called the Saker.is. The Saker is a type of bird. It's kind of like in the eagle family. And he could see what was going on there. He saw that the West had a real grudge against China, and it was determined to have a war against it. So I understood from his point of view what was going on. That was back in 2013. 2014, I watched the coup in 2014 unfold. I saw the video leaked video where Victoria Nuland, who was the Undersecretary of State for Eastern European Affairs, discussing how to stage this coup in Ukraine and who she, an American, was going to install as president of a foreign country, along with the ambassador and the then Vice President Biden at the time giving the final go-ahead. So that was clear. And there was another fellow who was watching these things. His name escapes me, but he had a YouTube channel, which has subsequently been, he's not on there anymore, but you can track down his report on what actually happened in the coup in 2014. And also, I met this fellow online named Russell Bentley. And Russell Bentley was a guy from Texas who had quite an interesting career. He had gone to prison, actually, for running marijuana, but eventually he got off. He served his time. And when he heard what was going on in Ukraine, and because he had a military background, and because he had been a fan of Che Guevara for a long time, he realized in his mind he had to go to Ukraine and fight the Nazis that had actually taken over in Ukraine. So people say, "Oh, Eric, how could there be any Nazis?" Well, the evidence is quite clear. Early on, even the BBC was talking about quote-unquote ultra-nationalists. The Congress had actually voted down legislation for these people, but as the war ground on, they changed their mind because they realized that the facts weren't important. What was important was that they have to. The prime directive is to take down Russia. Why? Because Russia has a lot of resources, and also because Russia interferes with our imperialistic plans. As a little aside here, in our Revolutionary War, there was a particular country that was, the British were asking some German principalities, the Hessians, to send some mercenaries to help the British put down the American Revolution, and the Hessians agreed to do that. And they also asked the Russian Tsar to send some people, and the Russian Tsar said, thanks, but no thanks. And instead, he was actually, they were doing business with the colonists and supplying them with supplies that they actually needed. So Russia was an anti-British colonial power back during our revolution. And then during the Civil War, the British and the French were on the side of the slave-owning Confederacy, because they wanted to split apart the United States, which they saw as a competitor, which it turned out to be, and because they wanted to, have control of this neo colony, based on slavery, and they were planning, the British and the French, especially the British, were planning to blockade U.S. ports, such as I think it was New York and San Francisco, and the Russians said to the British, if you do that, we're sending we're sending ships to protect those ports, and if you want to fight the colonists, fight these people who are against your imperialism, you're going to have to fight us too, which flashes forward to the current situation in Venezuela, because damn those Russians, we're just trying to steal Venezuela's oil fair and square because it belongs to us. And those Russians, they sent some warships in, and they're basically supplying Venezuela with cover so that the U.S. can't just barge in and beat the crap out of Venezuela. So those Russians, they've got all these resources. They're always in the way. How do we get rid of these people? They're really a problem for us. So, and one way to do that was to instigate a coup in Ukraine in 2014. The coup occurs. They use actual Nazis. These were people who were the collaborators of a fellow named Stefan Bandera, who wore a Nazi uniform and carried out massacres during the Nazi occupation of Ukraine during World War II. And eventually, of course, they were driven out. And as I was saying to my friend, the historical evidence shows that about 10% of the people in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic supported Stefan Bandera and his ilk, but 90% were on the side of the Soviet Union. And it was the Ukrainian fronts. I think it was the first and the second Ukrainian fronts. These are millions of Ukrainians were fighting on the side of the Soviet Union to get rid of these Nazis who had killed hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Belarusians and Jews, Gypsies, anybody they could get their hand on who was not, who was racially inferior to the German racists and also the Ukrainian racists. So this is kind of like one of the core factors in this whole situation. So getting back to Russell Bentley, he went in there, and he was fighting in some really brutal fighting. He came, just practically like a hair's breadth distance from getting killed. He was in a building. He got up in the morning around, 5 o'clock or something like that. He was about to make some coffee, and a shell went right through the wall and, missed him by, 3 feet or something, blasted a hole in the wall. And if he had been just 3 feet closer, he would have been blasted to bits, and that would obliterated basically. But he was very lucky, survived that. And then after that incident at the Donetsk airport, this video shows him in 2015 in a patrol in a neighborhood that has been shelled and basically decimated by the Ukrainian army with their artillery. And he talks about it in some detail. It's about a 10 or 11 minute long video. And he says, look, I'm here fighting these Nazis. The United States is supplying them, and I'm doing my job to stop this. And he says, it's our job to take responsibility for the crimes of our government. And he says, I'm doing my part by fighting. You don't have to do that, but I'm asking you to do your part in explaining all this stuff to people. So, and I knew Russell personally. I used to talk to him on the phone through the internet. So I knew him personally, and we had a good relationship and very mutual respect. So when people say, "Oh, maybe that's just a video," I say, "No, I knew this person. I know exactly what he was about." So let me just leave it at that. And there's another video by another fellow who has it's called Storm Clouds Gathering. And I didn't know this person personally, but he made a report about what went down in the Ukraine coup. And I knew about the fact that there were snipers and that, close to 100 people got killed, and it was blamed on the then President Yanukovych. And it turned out later that these snipers were actually hired by the ultranationalists, basically hired by the West to stage a false flag attack. And this is something that happens all the time, where they will stage an attack, blame it on their target as an excuse to follow up with their nefarious agenda. And that's exactly what happened with that coup. And then, of course, since then, as I was explaining to my friend, people say, "Oh, Putin doesn't want to negotiate." He had tried to negotiate with them for 30 years, and the most recent, one of them were in 2015. He had in 2022, actually, after several failed negotiations of the Minsk agreements, and also a treaty that Russia had sent to the United States and to NATO about stabilizing the situation. Russia didn't appreciate NATO troops coming closer and closer to Russia's border any more than the United States would feel so good about Russian troops on U.S. borders, in Canada or Mexico. So it's what's good for the goose is good for the gander, so to speak. So what happened and I explained to my friend, the people are so tied into Western media that they really don't know what's going on. And so I had to explain to him that when the Ukraine military was shelling the people in eastern Ukraine, they were shelling them every day, basically for 8 years following the coup in 2014. And eventually there was a stalemate with these so-called Minsk agreements, which were supposed to solve this problem. It was never intended to solve the problem. And finally, when the shelling went from 40 a day to 1,400 per day, if you can imagine some hostile entity firing into your neighborhood 40 shells a day and going up to 1,400 shells in your city, what would you do about it? Well, they said to Russia, the next door neighbor, it's been 8 years here. We're not going to get any kind of resolution to these Minsk agreements. This government clearly in Ukraine that was installed by the West has no intention of having peace with us. So, and they're obviously planning to invade and kill us. And that was when Russia went in and they preempted that attack. Now, after they did that, they were very close to Kiev. They only sent in maybe a third of what they would need, a minimum of a third of what they would need to stage a full-scale onslaught of the country to take it over. In other words, instead of 150,000, they would have needed 500,000 people or 1 million people to actually occupy Ukraine. That was not President Putin's intention. So what he did was he said, okay, let's have a negotiation. And he said, let's negotiate where your government in Ukraine will agree finally that people who speak Russian will not be attacked anymore, and that we'll have other agreements so that we can stabilize the situation. And Zelensky, who was the president at the time, who had been elected, by the way, with 75% of the population wanting to have peace with Russia, and yet when he became president, he got under tremendous pressure not to do that. He went. There was a scene where he went to visit these Azov battalion. These are these far-right, neo-Nazi battalions, and he said, guys, I'm going to negotiate a peace situation. And they said, if you negotiate peace, we're going to hang you from a lamppost. So he thought, well, I don't want to be hung from a lamppost, and the United States is going to send us billions of dollars, which I can skim off for myself and get filthy rich. So that was the decision that he made. And that was in 2022. And of course, the West had insisted that they felt that through a combination of sanctions and their misconception of Western military superiority over Russia, that they could take Russia down, because that's the whole point. They want to eliminate the opposition to their imperialism and their colonialistic aspirations, as we see exhibited in Venezuela and other countries. It hasn't worked out for them. So it's my job to explain all this to people so that they will disabuse themselves of of what they've been told, and B, that they really need to get off of the mainstream or even the alt media. These if you're falling into the false dichotomy of Democratic versus Republican politics, you're completely missing the whole situation. Both of those entities, they're fully funded by corporations, by lobbyists, especially the Zionist lobby, even the Ukrainian lobbies, the Turkish lobby, and of course the drug companies, the arms makers, all of these people. There was a bipartisan National Defense Authorization Act that just got passed. It's like $900 billion with a B, $900 billion. And this is under the guy who says he's the peace president. So we're in a state of massive cognitive dissonance here. And it's my job, I'm a self-appointed person who's trying to break you out of your cognitive dissonance to understand what's actually going on. You need to defragment your mind and realize that when the U.S. government says they want peace, they don't. And when they say that they're defending a poor defenseless country like Ukraine, no, if they really cared about Ukraine, they would have defunded them. They would have never staged the coup in the first place, and they would have agreed to stop this war back in 2014 when it actually started, when it broke out. So that's the reality. So that's basically what I have to say. And if you scroll down below this video, you'll see a couple of other videos which I talk about. Those are from 2014 and 2015. So those of you who think the war started in 2022, I'm sorry to inform you that you are simply wrong. You missed the boat completely, and you tuned into this when the mainstream media whipped up your emotions to get you to think that Russia is the guilty party here, when in fact it's on the United States and its European lackeys who are responsible for this whole crisis. It's just a disaster for Ukraine. It never should have happened. Trump is right about that, but not because Trump was equally responsible for it, but it was all, what the West had to do was simply agree that when the Soviet Union disbanded, that NATO would not expand east of Germany. They broke their promise. Their goal has been to ring the Russian Federation with troops and place tremendous economic and political and military pressure on to break it up so that it can get their hands on their resources and prevent a counterbalance to their imperial plans. That's what it's all about. So I'll end it there. I thank you for listening. Again, I hope you will. So the main thing you can do to support my channel, because I'm not making any, how much money do you think I'm making on this? It's like next to nothing. Doesn't nearly cover my expenses. But what you can do is share this information. Pass this information on to other people, so that if you're in a conversation with somebody, say, well, actually, there's this guy and he's done his homework. He's actually visited Ukraine and visited Russia. He's talked with people from both sides, and he seems to know what he's talking about. So, and he has historical evidence to prove it. Facts and logic are not the same as opinion. Opinion is just something you pluck out of the air, something that you just kind of think or believe, but it's not based on fact. You've got to face the fact. So that's what I have to say. And again, please like or share or comment or please react in some way, hopefully some positive way to what I'm saying here. So I appreciate, again, your listening in, and I'll check back with you soon with another video. Thanks a lot.